Hello and welcome to the Creative Lotus Podcast. I'm your host, Alan Zaki.
He would always just say, Ian, your job is to get the job done. That repeats in my head all the time. I literally hear that on every single job that I do. And it's just one of those things that there is no excuse. Your job is to make sure you get the job done.
Hello and welcome to the Creative Lotus Podcast. On this week's episode, we have IAN SPANIER, who is an amazing photographer. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. So Ian, I know that, we got to work together last year, I think it was, and that's how I kind of got to know you. But for everyone that's listening and watching, I'm just kind of curious if you can give us some background on maybe where you're born and raised, and ultimately kind of how did you get into photography?
Sure. So I was born and raised in a very small town outside New York City called Hastings. It's about 20 minutes north of the city, but it couldn't be smaller. It was about 2 square miles, if I think that's correct. So graduating public high school class of 64. So it was definitely small, but I could see the city from the Hudson River. So it was always kind of a piece of me. And then I did end up going to school upstate New York and lived in the city every summer. And then previous 13 years following that, lived in New York City. So that's where most of my experience comes from. I think my story is really that I tried to not be a photographer my whole time. I've had a camera since I was 6 years old. It's kind of always been around. I've always loved it and been into it, but I went to college thinking I was going to play soccer for 4 years and study sports medicine and become a trainer for a pro sports team. I had decided that sophomore year of high school, and I was just really into sports, and I was really into the rehab process, having had a lot of injuries myself. So I went to school thinking that's what I would do. I ended up only playing soccer for a year, had a bunch of injuries, did spend a good amount of time in the training room, helping others and working on myself. However, I quickly learned that between the demanding schedule of soccer and a very horrible first-term freshman year schedule, there was no way I could make the grades in college unless I started taking some art classes to keep my grades up. I always did drawing and painting. So I took a drawing class, got an A, and I was like, hey, might as well do this every term. And we were on trimester. And photography just happened to be the spring trimester class. So I took that, got an A in that as well, and realized this is what I should be doing. By sophomore year, I was spending more time in the darkroom, less time in the training room, and the decision was kind of made sort of for me. That said, even after doing some internships in New York and then even taking a 10-week term in New York working for 2 photographers, which is really my only assisting experience, I decided that I still didn't want to be a photographer, even though I was going to major in it when I got back to school. And I had done an internship at GQ magazine and loved it, and basically was working in the photo department there. And I realized that maybe I'd be better looking at photographs and directing photographs as opposed to making them myself. So during the rest of school and then immediately following school, I ended up becoming a photo editor at GQ, and then ultimately moving on to Esquire, ESPN, Marie Claire, Men's Health, Us Weekly, all these titles, all the kind of major magazines during the late 90s, early 2000s, when magazines were quite good. And even with that, didn't intend to shoot. But the first 3 weeks I was at GQ, book review changed. And this is, dating myself, obviously, but pre-digital. And we needed a book photographed last minute. And there wasn't time to send it out, get it done and all that stuff. And I said, well, I have a camera and I have a small flash. I know what you guys do. You always have a little shadow past the book and fan out the pages. I can do that at home. So I went home, bought a piece of paper, held up the flash in my hand, took the picture, and that started 6.5 years of being a still life photographer. Wow. So that experience really just led to me realizing that I could utilize my photography experience in a unique position, because at the time there was only 3 photo editors who actually made pictures as well, which was quite a shock to my system, because my understanding was photo editors took pictures too. I had always studied Life magazine and magazines like that. When I learned that that wasn't the case, I was like, wait a second, I can use this to my advantage. And I started in interviews saying, you can hire me as a photographer and a photo editor, and I can save you guys money, and here's how. And basically, the nice thing that really came from that was me learning not just the business side of the photography industry, but also being a photographer. And so that, spilled forward into my career when ultimately the last job I had, which was as a staff photographer for a media company, when they went Chapter 11, it kicked me out of the safety net that I was in. And that's how I became a full-time photographer.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you so much. It's so detailed, and I had no clue about your past. So that's really cool to know. And I feel like, so because you were doing both sides of it, not only taking the photographs, but, editing them and kind of putting together the stories and stuff for publications, do you feel like that really influenced the way that your eye looks at commercial photography or the way that you shoot? Because you were doing product and still life, but now your book is primarily, people for the most part. So I'm curious kind of how did that transition change, but then also kind of, how does your eye change, from editorial to where you're at now?
Sure. So along that path, I would say that what sort of happened was that, I never had a passion for still life. I just understood how to light. And that was kind of really where it came from. And, as people were paying me, I was like, I'll make this money on the side. It's kind of nice. And the influence of magazines was always there and is always there. I would say that. I still think very editorially. I always think, what's the story? What's the job? Those are all big parts of it, which I know we're going to touch on that a little bit later as well. But really what I would say sort of happened was that as I got better and better as a photographer, I started branching out. So still life turned into travel turned into portraits. People would ask me to shoot fashion from time to time. So it's sort of like I dipped a toe in all these different pools. All along the way, people were like, no, you have to concentrate on one thing. We got to put you in a box and decide this is what you're going to do. And I fought that my entire career. And I recently was asked this question, and I would tell the same story, which is basically that despite fighting that my whole career, this is sort of in the last few years, it's finally all come to fruition where all these experiences now gives my clients a sense of security. You and I worked on a job like this where I shot the still life and the celebrity portrait. And the reason that I'm comfortable with that and I can make my clients comfortable with that is that I have all these experiences in these, various pools that I dip my toe in. Ultimately, I always believed, and this comes from the photography that I always admired and still do and still look back at more than anything else, which is the original masters of photography. If you look at Irving Penn, for example, he shoots everything. Yeah. And there's a reason for it because he's good at everything. And sure, there's things that I'm stronger at and there's things that I find, I'm more drawn to. But at the end of the day, to me, it all comes down to lighting. And if you understand lighting, you can pretty much shoot anything. Yeah. If you have a modicum of passion for it that you can, pull out. So there's nothing wrong with concentrating on one area. I just happen to be somebody that wants to concentrate on photography, not just one area. Yeah. So back to sort of your question on that, the influence of the magazine industry certainly is in me. More than anything, it helped me run a business and it made me understand what my clients are up against when it comes to these jobs, the challenges that we face for budget reasons, deadlines, all those things. I'm very understanding of where these people are coming from because I lived that life. And so as a photographer, I think it made me better. It made me more marketable in certain ways because my clients know they can send me off to Timbuktu without an editor and I can get the story. And that's my job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think I love what you just said about having the idea of always having a story that you're telling with your imagery, I think is really kind of necessary to make great images because, nowadays with, like you said, not to date yourself, but, talking about film, and it really was the only medium to shoot at the time, but now kind of being able to shoot, thousands of images if you want, in a single job, kind of takes away the creative eye. It's not just snap, 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 and boom, I got one in the thousands, but rather, you really know what you're doing in creating that story. So I always like to ask each creative that I have on here, kind of what struggles have you had to go through? I mean, you kind of shared already, going from sports and then finding kind of the arts and going into that. But for your career, kind of what personal struggles have you had to go through that you felt maybe kind of propelled you actually in the success of your photography career this far?
Well, the one I sort of brought up already, which is essentially that especially in New York, I found it, and this obviously I lived there at the time, but the idea that you have to be in a box, I think that has been my biggest challenge, and trying to get new clients and potential clients to understand when they were looking at my work that just because I can shoot fitness, I can also shoot a celebrity portrait. And it comes down to lighting. But getting people to connect those dots for whatever reason was always very difficult up until the last few years, I would say. And then in the last several years, I would say what sort of clicked, I think, is that the message that I was putting out there, I sort of focused my website a bit more. I started moving away some of the things that might distract from what I deemed as, the area that I should be working in right now. And I do pay very much attention to the market. When the travel industry dried up, I sort of moved away from it, focused more on portraits, worked my portrait game, that kind of thing. But more than anything, I would say that at this point, it's that there's a cohesive message that comes, I would argue, through my work, which is essentially that if you look from one spectrum to the other of the subject matter, the tie-in is lighting. And as lighting is, and somebody once said this to me, which was great, which was really the thing that made it click in my head that I'm doing the right thing, which is essentially that, even though you shoot soft style or dark and moody, you can tell it's the same guy. It's the same message being sent and the same vision is being put forth. And it's a guy who understands lighting. So I took that ball and I ran with it because basically to me, that's like, okay, so that's going to be my story. So when somebody asks me, what do you do? And I say, well, I light people and I make portraits and this is how I do it. I've also sort of taken on the idea that I don't care if it's a cup of coffee or a celebrity or a fitness athlete or a business person in front of me, it's still the subject and it's about lighting the subject and telling the story of the day. What's the product that I'm getting across here? What story do I need to help elude from this image that the viewer who's not being told what it is going to feel something, hopefully what the client needs. And that's really the goal at this point, going from that sort of magazine to more commercial work, which is really where I'm in now, marketing, advertising type stuff, where you're really selling a product. But even looking back to what we talked about with magazines, magazines are a product too. And the reason I was able to work at GQ and Marie Claire, even though they're both in the fashion world, I'm a straight guy from, New York. What do I know about Marie Claire? Not very much, so, but the reason I think I succeeded I worked there for 3 years. The reason I succeeded as a photo director there was really the fact that I understood the product. I could look at the magazine and understand the product. So transferring that same mentality into being the photographer who's actually pushing the button, I actually find it easier because now I'm not having to convey it to a third party. I'm just conveying it to myself. So when, a client calls me and says, this is the product, I think we did Black Box Wine. So when Black Box Wine calls me, I know that I can relate to the product, whether I drink wine or not, whether I even tasted their wine or not. I know I can relate to it because that's the product. Now I understand that's the product. And then I start, formulating how I'm going to sell that with lighting.
Yeah. Absolutely. Lighting is everything. I think that's one of the most crucial things people need to understand in photography is, lighting is everything, because it will change an image from, like you said, doing a dramatic portrait to, the cover of a Marie Claire magazine or something like that. So absolutely. The name of this podcast is called the Creative Lotus, and the idea behind it is that the lotus, both blooms and seeds at the same time. So it's very much like this cause and effect concept. So I ask each creative, kind of what do you consider to be your like lotus blossom kind of moment? Like what was the shit or the muck underneath that ultimately led to your kind of career blooming in the way that it has today?
Interesting. I think it's the Shawshank Redemption analogy of miles of shit to get to the end. I would sort of look at it that way, honestly. I really feel like the hustle was from day one convincing people that I could do what I do. Mm-hmm. And I faced those challenges even as a photo editor. People were like, you can't be a photo editor who takes pictures. Mm-hmm. Nobody does that. And of course, the world changed, and then we got to a place where all photo editors were sort of photographers in one form or fashion, and a lot are today. But like I said, when I was there was 3, and that was it. And that's across the country. And I knew all of us. And I called them for advice, saying, how do you do this? And I think those are the things. I think what sort of happened. Certainly in New York was, and I still sort of feel this about my work today, which is like, you either get me or you don't. It's very 50-50, I think. And it's one of those things where some photo editors looked at it as, wow, he knows what I do. This is fantastic. I can send him off to a job. And he's not going to call me up and say, the electricity went out and what do we do? Or it's snowing and it was supposed to be sunny out. What do we do? Because that does happen as a photo editor. You get that call from photographers, especially less experienced photographers. But on the flip side, there was photo editors who were threatened by the fact that I knew what they do. And they straight up wouldn't hire me because they felt like some job security issue with that I understand what they do. So they're now threatened by the fact that I do that and I push the button. So, and there's nothing I could do about that. That was the early challenge. And then add to that the challenge that I was shooting all these different subject matters and trying to convince people with the portfolio that had everything from A to Z and say, I can do all of this. And people would say, well, that's not a clear message. And agents and reps would say, well, you need to focus your work for us to be able to sell you. Otherwise, we can't, work together kind of a thing. And years and years of just persevering upstream, I think has really just finally paid off to this point where now there's an appreciation for it. And when somebody calls me, again, going back to the job you and I did, where they say, well, listen, here's we're hiring you to shoot the celebrity. But here's the challenge. We also need to do product shots. Can you do that? Yeah. And it's like, yeah, I can, and so now it's sort of working. Yeah.
No, that's amazing. I think, the greatest thing that I kind of learned from you and, when we were talking and everything not on set between our long spans of time while they were shooting the commercial side of things, and before you were able to shoot stills, is that you have such a drive and kind of talking about hustle. You're probably one of the only photographers I personally know, that has a lot of really great brands, affiliates, with kind of different brands specifically. And so I find that to be incredible. Kind of where did that concept or idea kind of come from, and how did you kind of go about doing that? Because you have Westcott and you have like Sekonic and these big brands that are well known in the industry, and to be kind of the face of and also educator for some of them is quite incredible. So I'd love to kind of know more about that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's sort of. It started years ago in some form, but really the pandemic led to a lot of things because I just can't sit idle. I can't sit still. So not only did I work on a personal project throughout the entire quarantine, which presented its own challenges, but also opened up a lot of doors. And it actually led to me working during the pandemic, which I know is unusual. But really, I started to go after clientele through ambassador programs because I realized that, okay, here I am on Instagram all the time. I should be doing something with this. And so I started reaching out to the brands. And mind you, I only work with brands that I actually utilize. I don't represent anything that I don't use myself. And I've had to turn down some people for their products don't actually help me do my job. But I love the products that do. Westcott, as you mentioned, which absolutely love their products. The spider holster even, which is like, just a camera support system with a hand grip and a little belt and harness system that allows you to, be hands-free without putting your camera down on a table and things like that. Those products to me like make my job easier. So I love talking about those things. Even the t-shirts I wear, it comes from a specific company because I realize that I can represent these people with, the audience that I'm trying to build on Instagram and other, social media, but also that these are real things that I use. So it's not really hawking products. It's more so representing products that I actually use. And then in the education aspect, speaking engagements and something I never planned to do. I actually hate being on camera and would prefer to always be behind it. But somebody asked me to speak, at one event and it went well. And a bag company came up to me right afterwards and said, would you use our bags? And I was like, okay, this kind of works. And I realized the value of it. And I love sharing the stories about my journey as a photographer. So if that helps young photographers and if you've ever heard me speak, I preach about the importance of using a light meter so much that, it is something that I would love for young photographers to understand the true way to do lighting and the true way to understand lighting so that we're all better. Because if we're all better, it just only pushes the community up and makes us shine. If I'm sure you remember the sort of influencer movement that happened, a lot of us sort of, quote unquote, pure photographers were looking at this and gagging because we were starting to say, well, if this lasts, this pushes people who actually know what they're doing out of the industry. And that's a bad thing. And so for me to share my knowledge with people, I'm all for it. I'm an open book, as I always say to these educational classes.
Yeah. Well, I will say you are very good on camera. I've watched the behind the scenes as well as kind of your educational videos on YouTube. So no shame there by any means. No, I think that's really great. I think, talking about the fact that, this wave of influencer kind of culture, but also, industry kind of shift, if you will, has been kind of a lightning change. And you actually are really great at adapting to it, I think, because to your point that you just made, a lot of photographers aren't, and haven't really been able to make that switch, making reels and doing, content that is video based, but also photo based and, showing more behind the scenes and kind of representing yourself in that way. And I think you talked to a really good point rather, that is, each of us, even though we're a photographer, we're also a brand, who you are and what you represent. And like you said, the stuff that you use, and work with, is a representation of yourself, which, like you said, you're not hawking, a bunch of stuff, but rather you're just, sharing what you like and what you use. And therefore, you recommend it to people, if you will. So it's amazing. My next question is kind of, and we didn't really talk about this already, which is, when did you come out to LA? Cause that's obviously how we met, but coming from New York originally, like when was the great haul across the States to the West Coast?
Sure. Well, I've done it twice now.
Oh, wow.
First time was, first time was 20 years ago, actually. And I absolutely hated it. I didn't even last 2 years. I'd come from New York City. I was used to subways and taxis and walking everywhere. And so the whole car culture thing was quite a shock to my system. And I was still a staff member of magazines at that time. So I was working in Woodland Hills at a fitness magazine. So I was driving from West Hollywood to Woodland Hills every day, and it was actually killing me. And so I went back pretty quickly, didn't like it. And then in like mid 2014, I was out here a decent amount for 4 clients that I was shooting for quite a bit, and really found that I was up for a change. I'd gone through 2 hurricanes, and I was living just outside the city, and the second hurricane decimated the town that I lived in.
Wow.
And I was basically like, I need a change. I've had enough with winter. I'm cold all the time. Like, I need a change. So since I was out here, I started really looking into it, and then ultimately made the move. And as luck would have it, three out of the four clients went out of business, and the fourth one went to Vegas full-time in-house with a photography staff member. So it was kind of like I had to start over. I still I would say 2015 was a good year because I still had a lot of my New York clients, and I think I went back like 10 times that year, plus travel to other places for those same clients. But then as 2016 rolled in, it was that distance started to have its effect. And that's really where I would kind of say I had to sort of start over and build new clients out here. And that's, again, that comes down to that hustle. I really started pushing at that point. And I'm thankful that the pandemic waited a few years, because if it had happened at that time, that might have pushed me out. But it was definitely a struggle for a couple of years there. And I still was holding on to a couple of clients in New York, which I think kept me afloating. And then ultimately I was able to sort of build a business out here. And, you want to talk about hustle. This is where it comes down to. What I saw in the market was that agents were less important. No offense to agents. Producers were becoming more important. Right. And so I started really working the phones, and I started to really touch base with a lot more producers and get them to know who I was. Whether they wanted to work with me or not, that was less important to me. I just needed them to know who I was and that I'm in town. This is where I live. This is where I work. Right. The other area that I really started to push, which is, the hardest of areas, I'm sure I would argue that probably the same 8 people shoot all the big stuff out here. And so being one of those select few is really difficult. And the writing on the wall that I sort of sussed out was that I needed to know more PR people. So the ones who represent the celebrities. Right. So again, just made a major push to get in with those people more and more and more, and get to a point where I was a household name. And again, the proof's in the pudding in the last, particularly the last 2 years, when I've gotten calls from celebrity magazines to shoot a portrait, they would say things like, it's between you and 2 other people. That kind of, we're all used to that sort of commentary. But because these PR people, I think more now know who I am, I get yes very quickly. And that's huge. I'm sure you just saw the other day that I posted, the shoot with Brendan Fraser. Yep. That only happened because of that work from 2017 to 2023. So I would fully credit that to the hustle, and the PR people at least saying, oh, his name sounds familiar. Even if that's it, I'll take it, because I think that's very important in this town. It's a different market than New York for sure. That's sort of that transition. And I will tell you that I love California, except for the rain, but that we're having right now. But I love the weather out here. And I think I underappreciated it that 20 years ago when I came out initially, and didn't value it enough to how critical it is to being happy and having the lifestyle that I like, and all those aspects.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's so weird. And congrats first and foremost, on the Brendan Fraser backstage, and now he's Oscar winner, Brendan Fraser as well. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think the connections out here are so crucial. I mean, that's I know I saw your comment actually on a photo editor, Rob Haggart on Instagram, had kind of put out there this new question to photographers, really kind of like, how do you promote yourself, and what do you think is worthwhile and whatever. And I do think that so much of it is word of mouth, and your reputation, people knowing who you are to hire you is what's so crucial. So I'm curious, kind of what has been your greatest weakness as a photographer, but when you see that weakness, how do you kind of shift that or change that in the moment?
As a photographer or as a business person?
Either or. I mean, either work. Because it's kind of two in the same. Yeah.
Tied in a bit. I would probably say that the most difficult challenge that I have is that, I'm not a big partier. I don't really network in the way that I probably should or did back when I was in New York. Of course, being in New York, it's a different game. All the parties were there. American Photography, all those, the photography annual, I don't even know if that's around anymore, but those parties were like, I loved going there, because when I was a photo editor, the photographers all knew me and they all wanted work from me.
Right.
And when I became a photographer, the photo editors were the ones I wanted to network with and mingle with. So, I obviously have a good number of friends in the magazine industry from years of being there, but that was very easy to me. LA, as I'm sure you know, is very spread out. And, I live north of the city. I don't love having to do that drive if I'm not getting paid. So, the effort sometimes gets outweighed by the desire. So it's a tougher thing. And then, of course, throw in a pandemic and a quarantine and all those things. And then it became almost impossible. And the biggest challenge I would say that I've had since living here this time is really just meeting people. And I found that, over the years, those networking events turned into photography bitch sessions, which I have zero interest in that. I don't want to sit there and wallow in that shit that I've been in for years. So it's, I'd rather be in a positive space. And so that I think is the harder thing. And if you want to put a finger on the thing that challenges me the most, it's that I'm never satisfied. So I am not satisfied with where I'm at right now. And as good as it's been the last few years in particular, I know I'm capable of more. And it frustrates the hell out of me that I'm not there yet. And so, you could put the positive spin on it and say that there's always more to be striving for. But the negative spin on that is I think all artists, we all sort of suffer that self-doubt and that belief that we can't make it the way we want to. I sort of, liken it to the glass ceiling. And I've been banging this, my face up against that glass ceiling for a number of years to not being satisfied. If you ask my parents, they think that I helped Brendan Fraser win the Oscar. I mean, it's all perspective, of course. So,
Yes.
But it is one of those things. I know that I could be doing more. And I feel like there are times where I've proven it, but the result doesn't happen quickly. And I'm so eager for it to happen now. So that I would say is probably my biggest weakness, is that I just want more all the time. And I want that satisfaction now. And the patience is not really there for me. So it does drive me. But at the same time, I truly believe that I should already be doing some of the stuff that I would like to be doing.
Yeah. No, that's so relatable. I think as an artist, and business person as well, it is definitely something that we're all trying to strive more towards, is the things that you want and the things that you think that you should be able to do, but then it's a matter of making them happen is a whole nother thing, like you said, in the time frame that you want it done. So has there been kind of a moment where you felt like you quote unquote made it, or something, a real big highlight of your career that you really had been working for so long, kind of going along the same guidelines of what you were just saying, is kind of, there was a moment where you're like, damn it, I finally, made this thing happen that I've really been dreaming of?
I think, not to be negative on it, but when I first got out here, the very first job that I did was a billboard on Sunset. And
Wow.
It was 35 feet long, and I retouched it as well. So I literally did everything from A to Z on that job. It was right above the pink dot, right in the middle of Sunset. And you sort of think as a photographer, well, I've got a billboard on Sunset, amongst the giants of the industry right now, with like the big networks like HBO and Netflix and all that. And I'm sitting right in that pond, right with those guys. And then that client disappeared on me, and they changed staff. And again, this was that sort of bad luck period where literally nothing I could do. These were all things that were outside my control.
Right.
But I sort of would have thought that would have been the regular after that,
Yeah.
And that said, I'm also sort of, I don't know if you want to call it humble or negative. It's somewhere in between the two. I have had, my work, City National Bank has been a client of mine for the last, 4+ years. And they're right at the end of Sunset, and my images fill the entire bank facade of the bank. There's, surrounding the building. That's been up there for the last 3 years. And so technically I'm still on Sunset, but I look at it and saying, well, I should be the one up on that, the WeHo London on the side of the building, and the things like that, where, some of those goals that I set for myself have yet to be reached. But again, I don't look at those. Well, I should say it this way. There's something I talk about a lot with being on set and how we all face challenges on set, right?
Yeah.
Computer breaks, a light goes down, camera sticks, whatever the case is. Some people call those problems. I call them challenges. And the reason I call them challenges is because I look at it as a sense of things that we can overcome. It's a lot easier to overcome a challenge than it is to overcome a problem in my mind.
Yeah.
That said, I sort of look at that with my career in the same way, that this only presents a challenge to me, and I love challenges. So I look at it from the perspective that, no, I'm not yet exactly where I want to be, but it's not a problem. It's a challenge, and I'll take that challenge on.
That's a huge mindset shift to, from a problem to a challenge, and being able to kind of, shift that very quickly, like you said, on set or in life in general, and kind of change it. I'm curious, you've had kind of this very illustrious career in the photography industry and world. Have you had an agent? Do you want an agent? Have you kind of, what's your, or rep, I should say, more in the photo world, but kind of how have you navigated kind of, because you're doing commercial jobs, usually like having a rep or someone, an agent represent you, has kind of been the way for so many photographers. So I'm curious what your experience has been like.
So I've had about 6 agents over the years, or reps, as you say. And quite honestly, none of them have worked. I don't know why. It's just never been a great relationship for me. I've always gotten the work myself. I've given a lot of money to those reps over the years, and not really been satisfied with the return on the investment of it.
Right.
I'm open to it, but it's got to be the right relationship. One thing I really learned through that experience was that it's just like dating. You're really courting each other, for a period of time. You're getting to know each other, and you're getting to understand each other's, quirks and ideas and all those things. And then from there, it's got to be a very good relationship. And if it's not good, it's not going to succeed. And so I'm definitely open to the idea of it again, but I do believe that agents, unfortunately, have sort of been pushed aside in the last few years. And so they're less critical in the mix. People have less time. They have less desire to have a go-between, various reasons. That said, on the commercial jobs where it's necessary, which, I'm pretty good at sussing out very quickly, there has to be a go-between. I don't want to be discussing, nickels and dimes for a job when I got to stand on set with that same creative director or art director. Yeah. So in those cases, what I've been doing over the last few years is working with a producer. That producer will be my agent for that job. It gives them a little bit of extra money, and it also makes that buffer that's necessary. I think you kind of saw how I work. I'm a hands-on guy. I like to be in the mud with everybody else, but that said, there's an area that you really can use that buffer, and it's super important to recognize those situations so that you are not the photographer and the person arguing about money, particularly when budgets are tight and you need something and the client's pushing back and saying, we just don't have it, because they always have it. When they say that we just don't have it, there's always a way to do that. And I'm a pretty tight ship. I don't really, use a lot of equipment. I don't really need a lot of staff. I'm very basic in that way. But at the same time, the importance of that producer or agent in some cases, I think, is critical to the success of a job.
No, it is. There is definitely a shift in the industry right now. I think you make a very valid point that so many photographers are being found online or through their websites, but social media as well. And the ability to get a job, as a photographer is not necessarily have to go, and deal with it. But having a third party, if you will, involved in those projects, I think is crucial, because we're talking big budgets, not, here's a few $100 or $1,000 even, it's like tens of thousands, if not more. So,
for, magazine assignments, so not necessary, but, there was a time and period where it did and was necessary. I mean, when, in the early 2000s, when photographers were so busy, that agent was really booking the job because the photographer was off doing so much other stuff that
Yeah.
they could focus on their photography, and the agent was really there to help produce the shoot and have the photographer show up. And, you might, when I was doing the photo directing, it might be 10 conversations with an agent and 1 conversation with the photographer, and that was it.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case now. I mean, I do jobs for magazines now. There's nobody else there but me. That's kind of the norm on a lot of these jobs.
Yeah. Definitely a big change. Lots of things, lots of things have shifted in the last 10 plus years. I'm curious, kind of what brings you the most happiness now versus maybe when you first got into the industry and were working as a photo editor and a photo director in the industry. I mean, that's a huge kind of shift and lots of things have changed, but curious.
I think the shift was really within me. I think the photo editing, like I said, in college, I sort of made that decision that I lived in a house with like 30 guys. I was like, I don't need to do that in Brooklyn. I want to live, nicer in New York. And I saw the other side and I knew what I wanted at that time. So that was sort of helped push that decision, in that case. And I loved editing for a period of time. I loved the stature of being with magazines and, dropping the business card to get into the clubs and all that stuff back in the day. That was all very nice and good. There was a certain respect to photo editors then. I don't know if that respect is still there. I think creative directors sort of took over as the deciders. Again, I studied the old school, the photo editors who really impacted the look of a magazine because they had a say and they had a direct connection with the photographers in order to create these iconic magazines, in the 90s and 2000s. I think that shifted and creative directors sort of took over that role. They didn't just design the magazines. They started dictating the art space as well. I think the joy at this point really it comes from working for myself. I think as I got further along in my career as a photo editor, I hated working for other people. I just really found the frustrations of the red tape and the office politics and all those aspects. I hated being at the desk when there was nothing to do. And, I knew I could be doing better things than sitting at the desk. I sort of used to tell people, particularly towards the end of my 13 years as a photo editor, I work from 10 to 6. If I need to stay here late, I'll stay here late. The only once in a blue moon, if there's a job in LA and I'm in New York and I got to talk to the person after 6 o'clock, otherwise the job's getting done and you don't have to worry about it. I don't need to sit here all day and do this thing. And it was more for my own mental, clarity, because it was really just one of those things where it's an incredible amount of wasted time. Having meetings about having a meeting and things like that drove me nuts, and as a photographer, you set your own schedule, obviously, and, you work the way you want to work. You do the things in your life that make you happy as well as the career. I do spend a lot of time. It is a 24/7 job in my mind at all times. There are no days off. I mean, I work weekends, I work nights, I work early mornings. All those things are there. But I also know that, if I really need a day off, then you take the day off, you go snowboarding, you go play golf, you do what you got to do. And that's the beauty of the freelance, situation, which you're all too familiar, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, totally. What do you do you kind of mentioned 2 things there, but because you are freelance, kind of what do you do for fun? Like how do you kind of just like let yourself go completely away from like industry stuff and really just kind of let yourself be free, whether that's a weekly basis or maybe it's going on a vacation, I don't know, whatever suits you.
I'm definitely a workaholic. I mean, I definitely am. Even when I'm off doing something non-work related, I often am thinking of work, or sometimes I'll schedule, my email promos for the day that I go to play golf so that I know at least something is going on in the background, things like that. Yeah. I do love sports still, so I still play sports quite a bit. I work out all the time and motorcycle, hiking, enjoying the outside lifestyle here for sure. Snowboarding, as you mentioned. I've been doing a bit more travel lately. I did travel a ton. I used to be on staff with a travel magazine. So during that period of time, I hit, 49 of the 50 states at one point and wow. 62 countries, something like that. So there was quite a bit of travel in my past, and I still love traveling when I can. But I think, at this point, the job is always in my mind. And so I love it. So it doesn't bother me that that's part of it. It's not like back in the day when you just can't stand your boss anymore. I'm my own boss. So, I really enjoy shooting. And so I do a lot of personal work. I always believe that it's super important to have a personal project going, even if just, here and there, not necessarily a cohesive package, but just doing personal shoots. I think it's super important. It gives you an opportunity to test out things that you'd like to apply to a job. And then usually I have like a personal project that I'm working on, something bigger. And, I finished one just this past, winter, basically. That took 3 years. So it's, those are the things that I do. And it's, that's fun to me. As weird as it sounds that it's work, but it's fun because it's not dictated by somebody else. So it's still on my time.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I mean, you just tapped into, while talking about all the things that you like to do for fun, you also tapped into kind of a few questions that I had. I was checking out your personal work, and I think it is 100% agree with you. I think it is so crucial to have kind of your creative mind kind of constantly creating new and, innovative things that you want to do that you're not necessarily assigned to do. But I'm curious, kind of, you do ride motorcycles. So this moto project I thought was really cool because it's so simple, but really kind of detail oriented. And then I know you have this pen inspired portfolio on your site, which I will definitely link all of your information to. But I'm kind of curious, how do you, come up with these ideas? Because like you said, you are kind of a photographer who does so many different genres, if you will, of photography. But how do you kind of keep track of it all and, and work on these projects? Like you said, the one that you just finished, took 3 years to do, but you're now just kind of coming to completion. So it seems like you have a lot going on.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's one of those things where if you have a passion for it, it's not work, and it's, in the case of the personal work, I feel like those are the testing grounds that, like I mentioned, that are so critical to having, again, those solutions when you're on set and something may not be exactly right for the client. Now I have another way I can present that it's possible to solve the issue of the day. The motorcycle project, which, I did call Moto, I actually did not ride motorcycle when I started it. I always wanted to, and I talked about it a ton with a lot of my subjects, but I ultimately took the class last year. So I've only been riding for a year, but I absolutely love it. But that was started 2 days before the pandemic, and I really was trying to push myself to do something slightly different than what I normally do, shooting at a bigger depth of field, using a little bit more equipment than I normally would use. And then adding to that, all of that was shot except for one day in my living room and turning my living room into a white studio. And the idea was, I'm going to show that I can do this on location, because I was doing it in part for other people, with the challenges of, different ceiling heights and all the other things, not enough space to really move back, the way I should, technically speaking. And I just really liked the different look enough that I said, okay, this is something I want to continue. And then the quarantine hit. And so it took 5 weeks until I could open up again. But ultimately, which, we sort of touched on earlier, the reason I was able to keep working during the pandemic was that I showed a client what I was doing, and with Cam Ranger, which is a product that I use that allows you to shoot a raw file plus a JPEG, and that JPEG goes to either a tablet or computer or an iPhone for your client to see. There's a way to dual band it where I could be on this podcast with you and share my screen, and you could actually see in real time all the images coming out of my camera and reacting to them, talking to me, talking to the model. So I ended up showing somebody that's what I was doing, one of my subjects, and she was talking to her agent about it. And she's a model and a motorcycle rider. And her agent pitched me to a client of hers that needed some clothing shot for a new catalog out of Phoenix. But obviously we couldn't travel. We couldn't do anything. The model thing was going to be an issue. Right. I said, well, I have a solution for that right here. I can shoot the models here. I actually took a COVID compliance course so that I would understand what the COVID thing would be. I didn't plan to be an officer, but I got the certification, so I'd understand it.
Right.
And I scheduled the models in increments where there would be a half-hour break that I could wipe down all the surfaces and everything. And my client sat in her living room in Phoenix and watched the shoot live at the same time, seeing the images pop up so she could give reactions, make suggestions to the models on what she wanted. So I was able to keep working. And then once that happened once, I was like, all right, now we can do this. And I started using that for some of my celebrity clients, and, really not stopping. Yes, it was a lot slower out here. Hollywood was shut down. So it really kind of put a big crink in the business that year, but things picked up right afterwards, and people knew that I had something going on that would allow me to shoot remotely and do some things that were a little bit unique, and clients wouldn't have to leave their desk, things like that. So that really paid off. And so the motorcycle thing really was that challenge. And then the final shoot, which I mentioned wasn't here. I shot that on location just because, the sort of culmination of the project in my mind was to shoot a motorcycle club. And it took me 6 months to find one that was willing to allow me to photograph them. And I found this great group of guys down in Venice, and we shot in the back of one of their businesses. So it was outside, just really more for the sheer amount of people that were there and getting them all to show up to one place in one morning in Culver City.
Nice. That's so cool. No, thank you for going into detail about your projects. And I think that, like you said at the beginning of this, it's like if you really have a passion for it, it's not work. You're just creating because you absolutely love what you're doing. So I think that's definitely necessary.
Yeah.
I'm curious, kind of because you're freelance and you're working on all these projects and everything. What is kind of a typical day in the life like for Ian?
Well, if I'm not shooting on set, typical day is I get up, breakfast, workout. It's pretty much almost every day. I work out probably 6 or 7 days a week. And that takes different forms. I'm either, doing weights or whatever, or, some days I hike and things like that, depending on the weather. That's pretty typical. And then, usually I try not to work during that period of time, but it's tough not to sometimes, especially if you have East Coast clients. So, I'll try to get, as few interruptions during that, the 1 minute breaks I'll take between sets or something. But I try to focus, so that I'm not breaking up the workout. And then often during that time, that's a lot of the brainstorming. You kind of zone out a little bit when you work out. So I use that time quite often to think of what am I going to do next, that kind of stuff. And then, it's really just a matter of what's going on. I do retouch, as I mentioned. So quite often I have retouching projects that are ongoing, whether it's for myself, my portfolio, or for clients. And the other thing I should have brought up first was the very first thing I do almost every day is to post on social media. It's just become so important, and it's just, I had to make it part of the routine. So every day, very first thing I do is come up with the next post. I'll sometimes plan stuff out for months. Sort of went on this campaign over the last, 2 years. I kind of spilled out everything I was going to do for a year. And then I sort of build off that at this point. But I try to be, hitting some of the trends with the reels and that kind of stuff. Admittedly, I'm okay at it. I'm not great at it. It's, I'm sort of above that, millennial, I'm a little bit older than that. So, for me, even though I act like I'm still a millennial, age-wise, but it is one of those things where I figured out something that sort of works for me. And again, going back to that, the brand is so important at this point that, building off of that is something I have to do every day. I don't post on the weekends typically unless I'm working, just to post that I'm working, but that's it. I don't use social media for personal stuff. I don't post my turkey sandwich or whatever, food I'm eating and things like that. Yeah. It's always work. And that's, again, that's the brand. The brand is just to show what I'm up to. I do have responsibilities with some of the programs that I'm an ambassador for. So that helps because that always means there's something always to strive for content. I do test products for Westcott from time to time. I developed a modifier for them last year, which was really fun because I was doing a lot of testing with that. And I test out some of the new products that are coming from ThinkTank from time to time. So that usually equates to me, using the equipment, but also shooting some images of it as well. So it's sort of self-imposed assignments, if you want to put it that way. So
Right.
I might take one of their bags and go, off for a hike and then go shoot some stuff on that hike for content for them. And so, I try to fill every day with something that will push the brand. If I have nothing that day, then it's what can I do to fill tomorrow? Because I ain't going to sit still. That's really what it comes down to.
Nice. When you're making all these videos and content and creating, really, is it all you, or do you have someone that you kind of work with that helps you to be able to make it? Because I mean, like you said, that's every single day, Monday through Friday, that's a lot of content to be creating on your own. But I'm just curious if you have any help doing it.
I wish I did. I don't. It's one of those things that every so often, I'll work with somebody who's like, oh, let me shoot something for you, or let me shoot some behind the scenes. Often on sets, like, if you saw any of the behind the scenes on the Brendan Fraser shoot, my assistant, who's the same assistant I worked with on a big book project, I had asked him to shoot BTS on anything that was interesting, and he's good at it. So, nice. Situations like that, I just might hand somebody my phone and just say, hey, just get me some stuff. If I'm working alone, you'll see quite a lot of my videos. I'll just, throw a time lapse on, something like that. I'll rig my iPhone up against something, or I'll just strap it to the edge of a pole or something like that. So it's tough. It is a lot of work. And I had to force myself to sort of think like that. I don't think in moving images as much as I think in stills. So it's tough for me sometimes. And then, you have your days where a lot's going on. You really need to focus on set. And so the thought of making a video for TikTok, it's like, are you kidding me right now? I don't want to, but I do understand the importance. So I try to get something as much as I possibly can. I try to get something just that I can utilize later when I can show the image.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I totally understand. It's funny. There's this, how like there's like trending songs and stuff that are obviously on Instagram, but then also probably on TikTok as well. And there's this woman that it's like, she like is singing to herself, like everything is content. Everything is content. Don't forget to film it. And I feel like that song is now stuck in my head. As a photographer. And if you asked me 10 years ago, there's no way in hell it'd be like, oh, I got a behind the scenes photo of us all. That's great. Or group photo. But now it's like everything is content. You really do have to like keep track of it all. It's nuts. So filming constantly.
It is. It's a little too much. Yeah, it's a little too much for sure. I mean, I wish sometimes people could see exactly what I'm seeing. Like I have actually bought like a little attachment for the top of the camera where you can put the phone right on top of the hot shoe. But honestly, like it just doesn't work. And a lot of times I can't show. I mean, sitting on that Brendan Fraser, that was tough. That was shot in January. And like,
oh, wow.
I had a big job with the client that I did the book project with. And he was like, how did you not tell me about this? And I was like, I couldn't. Like I had to sign something. I couldn't say what it was. And so it's tough sometimes. And, that's where I do find, though, that having something, even if it's just a time lapse or even just a 7-second clip, it can be huge because it just, I mean, as we've been seeing, Instagram, nobody's really posting pictures anymore. It's really about the reels, and how much importance is put on that. It makes it tough because personally, I would just like to show the final image and be done with it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's a different world that we're living in, that's for sure. My background, similar to you, is like, started on film and now we're here. So doesn't even matter anymore.
I'm sure we'll go back to film at some point.
Oh, I know. Well, it's crazy though, because I mean, I don't know if you shoot any film or not, but like now, but the price of film has just gone astronomical, so much so that everyone's like selling off their cameras because there was this huge influx. And then Kodak was like, one roll of film is like $20. And then you have to process it. And you're like, this is not fathomable. I mean, to me, then you just make art projects, right? You're really, really honing in on what you're doing every single frame you're taking if you're going to shoot film. But do you shoot any film currently?
I mean, there's nothing wrong. No, I actually sold most of my film cameras a few years ago. I kept my favorite which was a Rollei SL66E, which was like a little, oh my God, it's such a beautiful little camera. It's kind of like a Hasselblad, top viewfinder and bellows and everything. And I was sort of hoping that there would be the development of some sort of digital back for it. I've seen some people make some hack ones, but nothing's come up. So I've sort of held on to that. And my 4x5 cameras, I've kept pretty much all of those. I had a speed graphic up on the shelf over here. And I have a Super D, which is, the old one where you put your face down in the hood. And I still have some film that's sitting here. It's all outdated. It would be very interesting to see what would happen with it if I shot it. And I've sort of sat on it waiting for like the perfect assignment to come up where I'd want to shoot film. Yeah. But nothing's really struck me, and I know I can sort of do it in Photoshop anyway. So it's sort of one of those things where, do I want to go to the trouble of the lab and all the expense of all that stuff when I could just turn it right around and post myself. So yeah, I don't think I could ever sell the 4x5s. They're too precious, I would say. Yeah. But my Mamiya 6.7, which was my workhorse, I sold it to one of my assistants in New York, and I was happy to give it to him because he's very old school. He shoots with it all the time, and I know it's being used in a great way. So it's not like it just went off to B&H and used apartment or something.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm curious, kind of what have you learned about yourself being in this industry that you may not have known before? I mean, you've been doing it, like you said, your first camera is at the age of 6, so it's kind of like you've always been in it. But is there something specifically that you've learned about yourself that you maybe didn't know prior?
I think there was that period of time where, I really didn't believe I could be a full-time photographer. I sort of looked at it as a struggle that I didn't think I could muster, and when I say that I really fought it for a long time, that fight was definitely there, even when I was definitely tired of being a photo editor. And the reason I sort of got tired of it was I started to get frustrated with photographers that didn't get it when I'd hire them for a job. And not for nothing, I do feel like I was a good photo director. I was really concise and hands-on with explaining to the photographer the message that was coming from the creative director or myself, as far as the idea behind what they were, being assigned, so that they would complete the assignment correctly. And as I saw things, in person and, on set, even like where things didn't work, I'd be like, why are you putting the light there? Like the light should be over here, like things like that. And that frustration started to mount for me. And that's when I started to shoot a bit more. And I was fortunate that, there were some people that believed in me and they gave me opportunities. And I think, ultimately that's what sort of floats in my head, going back to what we were talking about earlier with, getting to where you want to get. I do think that I'm sort of at the mercy of an opportunity at this point, that it'll happen. It's just a question of the right person at the right time who decides I'm the guy that has to do this from now on, kind of thing. Right. But even when I came out here and then decided to go back, part of the reason I left New York was to get people to forget about me as a photo editor. Because that challenge that I faced of people who did not want to hire me, I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was a photo editor. So when I left, I thought it would take, a few months. I'll tell you right now, it took like 2 weeks. People forgot about me in New York. I mean, it is New York after all. So when I went back in under 2 years, I was sort of afraid that people would say, oh, you were the photo editor at such and such magazine. And right. That didn't happen. So I was happy that was the case. And so what I used to go back was the job offer from a creative director friend of mine who was at a media company, and he wanted a photo editor. He wanted me to be the photo editor. And I said, listen, I have an idea. I'm not photo editing now, but hire me as your staff photographer and I'll produce the shoots that I can't physically get to. And I said, nice. We'll come up with a budget solution for you guys. You guys have very little budget, so it'll actually save you money to have me on staff. But we'll also come up with a formula to keep those costs down. And so what I ultimately did was build it where, let's say there was an assignment in Los Angeles and the price of an airplane ticket was over $400. It wouldn't be worth it for me to fly to LA to do the assignment. So then I would hire somebody else to shoot it. But if they could come up with 2 assignments, then you could split that $400 across 2 assignments, and then it would become less expensive, helping the budget. And then boom, 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 it becomes less of a cost issue. And ultimately, we grew to 5 magazines with 3 staff photographers, and I ran the photo department, and that was that. And, health insurance, benefits, all those safety nets were there. And when they surprisingly went out of business, at that point, I was shooting more, and I still didn't believe that I could do it. I really still had my doubts. And once I had no choice, I then sort of looked at it and said, well, I've been making it as a photographer on the side without promoting myself, without trying, really just getting assignments from people that I knew and making some money, decent money. What's going to happen if I start promoting myself and start really putting myself out there? And I will tell you right now, as strange as it sounds, this is 2009 to 2012, middle of the recession, my 3 best years ever, still to this day.
Wow.
And I think that all comes down to the fact that all of a sudden the door was open and I could run with it. And, again, the hustle was there. I definitely hustled like crazy back then because it was literally do or die, at that point.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wow. That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. Cause I think, it's funny. I feel like people in the freelance world definitely struggle with this idea of like, oh, why am I doing this? Should I keep doing this? And the economy's gone up and down over the last, even 10 years, 20 years now. So it's kind of like, the perseverance to keep going has to be there, and like you said, I feel like you really have this idea to know how to hustle and to really want it, and you really, especially in LA, like you said, you have to really want it to live here because it is not cheap. So, or who has been kind of your biggest supporter or fan that has kind of kept you going through all these moments of like questioning your career and whether you really wanted to be a photographer and kind of keep going through the ups and downs of it all?
Probably me. Unfortunately, I don't think I could really put it on anybody else. I would definitely say that, I don't take compliments very well. So like, even if people like what I do, I sort of say, yeah, it was good, but I know I could also do this, or I know I could be doing more, those kind of things. And, I think that's part of the drive. It's sort of that never satisfied sort of feel. I do feel confident in what I do, and I do feel comfortable with where I'm at. And I do feel like the last few years in particular, I've really kind of come into my own in a lot of ways. But that's self-imposed. I don't really think I could say anybody did that for me. Hate to say.
No. Yeah. I think that's totally relatable. I mean, I definitely get it. I'm terrible at taking compliments. People would literally say like the nicest things. I'm like, okay, great. Yeah, that's nice. Next, like on to the next thing. But yeah, I totally understand. So I'm curious kind of what are maybe some goals that you have for the next maybe 3 to 5 years or even 10 years from now? Because, as you've shared throughout this entire interview, you've really kind of been the one to kind of like keep pressing forward and not, satisfied with what you've just done.
I mean, I think the ultimate goal for me has always been to be shooting more for the networks. And it's a tremendous challenge out here. As I sort of mentioned earlier, the assessment that I've done is pretty much that it's the same people shooting everything, and everybody tells me that too. And the road to getting in is very murky and unclear exactly how that happens. Yeah. And I'd like to say that's the goal, but at the same time, it might be a goal that I just can't see at this point, in that maybe it takes its shape differently than what I think it is. Maybe I even get those assignments that I think I want, and it's not the right assignment for me. I don't know. I sort of feel like I've done it in pieces, but just not all the time. I have a lot of confidence that I could be doing that stuff, what I think it is, but I've yet to meet the person that believes the same and wants to give me those opportunities to do it. So ultimately for me, this career in a whole is more about longevity than anything else. And that's something that I would say has been the thought from very early on. that it's more important to me that I outlast the others in terms of a consistency that sort of becomes timeless, if you want to put it that way. Mm-hmm. I'm not big on the flash in the pan lighting styles or color styles or I'm sure you remember the blue and red gel thing that happened for a minute there. Everybody was doing it all of a sudden, and you had to have it in your portfolios. And even today, I've had portfolio meetings where particularly agents will say, "Oh, well, this kind of look is happening right now. I think you should put that in your book." And the minute they say that, I'm like, "You'll never be my agent," because the fact of the matter is that you look at a Richard Avedon, and the reason those images still work is because it's got a quality and a timelessness to it. You could still look at it, take it apart as a photographer and say, "Oh, well, this was done wrong," or this could be done better, or maybe the light wasn't right on this one. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't matter because it's still timeless, and I'll take that any day over a hot, trendy look for the minute, because that stuff's never is going to last. So I've thought about the goal thing for quite a while, because it frustrates me that I haven't necessarily done all those assignments that I want to be doing regularly. Mm-hmm. And sort of taking a different look at it now, more from the idea that, if I'm still working 5-10 years from now, then there's some check mark of success in that might supersede the idea of necessarily doing those jobs A, B, and C that you think you should be doing. Because the fact is that, I do know my worth. There's jobs that I won't take because the budget's too low, things like that. But I try my damnedest to make it always work. I'll ask clients quite often, "What's your budget?" I will tell you straight up if I can make it work. And if I can make it work, I'll make it work. My kind of advice that I give to assistants quite often or young photographers, is if you take the job, the next day you should be satisfied with what you made. If you take it and you took $200 and you're pissed at yourself on the next day because you took $200 to do a job that you really should have gotten paid 4 or 6 or 1,000, then you shouldn't have taken that job. So I sort of use that as my own meter, that if I do a job that's really tight budget, really not what it should be, I'm still going to bring the level of quality as if it was 10 times the budget, but I still have to be satisfied internally with what I accepted as the fee for the day and be okay with that. So, I sort of thought about that in terms of where I want to be and where I'm trying to get at, mm-hmm. and thought, well, you know what, if I've got 5 or 10 more years of doing these jobs, but I'm still getting paid something and I'm satisfied with what I'm getting paid, then I'm still working as a professional photographer. What's to be upset about? That's a unique situation that I should be happy with.
Yeah. No, you not only did you answer my first question, but you answered my next question, which was, what advice would you give to a young photographer or assistant? And no, I think that's 100% true. It's like, how do you feel after you're doing this job? Because money comes and goes, right? But do you feel like you created value and it was worthwhile for you to do the job? Or do you feel like, wow, I really shouldn't have done that because I got taken advantage of, or it was really not worth my while? So absolutely. It's that constant battle.
Yeah. And you're going to have those experiences. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You're going to have those experiences where you do kick yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that because it's a lesson learned. And now you know not to do it again. I mean, it's the definition of insanity. If you keep doing it, obviously that's definition of insanity moment. But, the other thing I would say is, going to what you asked about the assistants, I tell this to assistants all the time, and I always kind of can see the flicker in the eye when they're not listening to it. But the biggest thing I always say is that if you're assisting me, for example, you owe yourself a day of doing something for yourself, whether it's a shoot, a retouch, or changing a portfolio, or trying a different style, something that propels you forward. If, maybe you can't foresee that your goal is to not be assisting in a year, but if you pay yourself back for the days that you work for somebody else, where it's the unfortunate position of the assistant, you literally don't get anything out of that day other than experience and a couple of bucks. and usually underpaid, in my opinion. So, and that's sometimes beyond the control of the photographer. It might be the budget's too low, but you're willing to take the job for the day. So you're working, you're getting the experience, whatever the case is. But if you don't pay yourself back with your own experience, then you're doing yourself a disservice if your goal is to move forward as a photographer of your own right. So it's frustrating to me to watch assistants who don't listen to that, because I think that's the most important thing. And it's something I started doing as a photo editor, where I would go and be on set for a magazine watching a photographer do a shoot that I knew I could do, even if I didn't know the equipment at that period of time. But I sat and watched that photo shoot, and then I would go home and I would do a setup of how I would do it. And so I would then teach myself, this is how you would do it if you do it. And then the next assignment that came up to me, then I would use that in my sort of, bag of tricks of lighting.
Wisdom. I love it. Yeah, absolutely. You have to, you have to be able to pay it to yourself. If you're doing one thing, but you really want to go after this other thing, then give yourself that opportunity to do it. So this is a fun question I always ask. What would you say to your future self 15 years from now? It's almost like a message in the bottle, right? Like, what would you want to say to yourself in 15 years from now?
Oh, God. On anything, or am I now on being a photographer?
On life, on photography, however you feel, like almost words of encouragement or whatever, however you feel you'd like to phrase it.
Oh boy. Learn more about investing and business. I think that it kills me. It absolutely kills me that, well, first off, photography in my college, I went to a liberal arts college. I didn't want to transfer because I was done with school after 2 years in my mind. I was ready to go work. Once I did that internship at GQ, I was like, this is where the real world is, and screw college. But I felt the need to finish. But we had 35 millimeter cameras, didn't shoot color, didn't have any lights. We had 2 silver reflectors from Home Depot. That's what we had for lights with 60-watt bulbs. That is it. And did not learn color photography, all that stuff. So I had to teach myself all that stuff after college. But literally no business classes. And I have an acquaintance who's the chair of the FIT photo department, and I've gone and spoken for him a few times. And we were talking one day after a lecture that they offer business classes for photographers, the photography students there. And he says, the kids don't care; they're glazed over the whole time. And I'm like, and he's a photographer himself, and he and I were talking about the fact that, my God, if they had that when we were coming up, like, to at least know how to run a business, like, I learned most of it from the magazine stuff, thank God, but I don't know anything. I worked at 3 business magazines that were all, I was photographing some of the richest guys in New York and other places. I didn't learn a goddamn thing about investing. And I kick myself for I literally just fall asleep the minute they start talking about stuff. But I wish I had paid attention to that stuff. And I wish there was opportunity at the time that I could have learned more about that, because maybe it would have made those tough times easier. Maybe it would have made some of the experiences that the mistakes that you make as you're coming up, to avoid those mistakes. Maybe it would put you in a position financially where you have an understanding of what to do with your money when you do have a big job, and how to, pay it, use it to push forward in your career. And I've had to just piece that all together, and still do. It's tough. So yeah, maybe that would probably be the area that lacks the most. You can always learn about a new camera, but business stuff, it's tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I think the majority of photographers, you see the artistry of it and you don't necessarily see the business side of it. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're freelance or if you're incorporated or whatever. It's like, it is business. We're not doing this for, tiddlywinks and fun. It's money in, money out. And yeah, you have to treat it as such, because all your clients are going to do the exact same thing. They're going to treat it like business. So yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Yeah. I'm curious, do you have a motto that you are, or phrase that you kind of live by as your go-to?
Yeah, one of the most fortunate things, and I've told this story a few times, so it's out there somewhere, but I was fortunate in my first couple of weeks at GQ to meet Harry Benson, the photographer that came to America with the Beatles, and he's photographed every president from Eisenhower to Trump. I kind of liken him to like the Where's Waldo of history. Like he literally has been through history, all these amazing experiences. So if you don't know his work, please, check it out because it's pretty amazing. And I became friends with Harry very quickly. And assigned him. I actually got to assist him once, which was really cool. So I got to do a road trip with him and do the lighting for him. And he used to take me out to lunch, and he would tell me stories about this or that, and a lot of his experiences. And so many of those stories he told me ended up influencing me as a photographer. From one case where he had like a quick story I'll tell you, which is that he was in the kitchen when Robert Kennedy got shot at the Ambassador Hotel in LA. So wow. The whole crowd started pushing into the kitchen, and Harry's with the crowd, and they're bringing Kennedy back into the kitchen. They lay him down on the floor. Harry jumps up on the table. He's taking pictures, and there's a very famous picture of Ethel Kennedy holding her hand up to the camera. That's Harry's picture. And he was telling me how he was shooting a couple frames and then taking the film out of the camera and shoving it into his socks because he saw the FBI agents around the room and he didn't want them taking his film. Right. And the reason for that was that he was on assignment. Okay. So I'm going to come back to that in a second. Fast forward to 2007. I'm in Detroit photographing this guy who wrote a book about rebuilding Fortune 500 companies from the ground up. So these are Fortune 500, big companies that have failed. And this guy is an expert on taking what they did wrong and then rebuilding them. So I had this idea of photographing him at a junkyard outside of Detroit. And now this is the middle of February. It's freezing cold. His bodyguard was a photography fan. So he voluntarily said, I'll find you a location. So I flew in, jump off the plane, drive out, meet him at this junkyard. And we're shooting out there. It's like 7 a.m. It's freezing cold. And I just finished taking this image of him with like a bunch of scrapyard material behind him. And I was like, I knew I had the shot. All of a sudden, 4 giant trucks pull up, block our cars in, and these gigantic construction guys start walking over to us. The minute I see them, I was shooting digital. I pulled the card out and I shoved it in my underwear. And sure enough, the biggest of the guys comes up to me, and I'm only 5'5", so I'm not a big guy. And he puts his hand right on the barrel of my lens, and he's just holding it. And they straight up were like, "What are you doing here?" And I was very honest. I said, we're actually done. I was just taking a portrait. This magazine from New York sent me out here to do this. They were like, there's no way a magazine sent you to Detroit to take a picture. Who does that? What magazine sends photographers to other states? And I was like, oh boy, this is going to be tough. And the bodyguard decided rather than, be polite and nice, he's going to get into a fight with them. So he was mouthing off to them and on and on and on. The idea for shoving the card into my underwear was straight out of that story from Harry. Okay. Ultimately they let us go. They took our information. I don't know what they're going to do with it, like driver's license numbers and all that stuff. But ultimately we left, and that was that. But the lesson in it was really that Harry kind of repeated this story. If you know Harry, he would tell you the same story a number of times, but I think there was a wisdom behind it, because he would say, your job as the photographer is to get the job done. And Harry has a very distinct voice. If you ever get the chance to watch, there's a movie about him. It's called Just Shoot This, I think, something like that. It used to be on Netflix. I think they moved it over summer. Yeah. So he's got a very high-pitched voice and a Scottish accent. So it's a very unique voice. As I can still hear it in my head. He kind of turned into like a third grandfather to me in a lot of ways. And he would always just say, Ian, your job is to get the job done. That repeats in my head all the time. I literally hear that on every single job that I do. And it's just one of those things that there is no excuse. When you're on a job, there's no point in calling the editor who's sitting at their desk, whether it's 3,500 miles away or 3 miles away. or if they're there for that sake. Your job is to make sure you get the job done. And that's the most important thing. So I think that would probably be the thing that I would say is the one advice piece that has stuck with me throughout my whole career.
Incredible. Wow. That was a really good story. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I think it is definitely, a responsibility as photographers and as creatives to get the job done. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, that actually kind of wraps it up. The only thing I ask is kind of where can people find you both online and social media? And if there was anything else that you wanted to share before we close out, then please.
Thanks. Well, my website is IANSPANIER.com, and Instagram is probably the best place to reach me. It's at IAN SPANIER. I do, as you know, Alan, put a ton of tips and tricks about this and that I do. I love sharing the stories behind the shoot. So I do put a lot of stuff up there for anybody who's looking to learn. I do a number of appearances. Usually I do a lot of live demos of lighting and things like that. This one will be about everything I do from shoot to finish. So it'll start off with the pre-shoot plan, take you through the shoot, and then the post work as well. So this is really everything all in one space. So just, if you follow me, you'll see me posting about whatever appearances I have coming up. And then if you get a chance, I just finished a huge book for Asaline Publisher, along with Aaron Sigmund Books. And thank you. It's all about the Arturo Fuente Cigar Company. The book is gigantic. It's a $1,000 book. They only make a certain number of copies of it. So it's pretty special. They're going to do a smaller edition of it with actually more pictures, which is kind of amazing. That's going to be packaged with a limited edition of cigars as well. So that's forthcoming soon. But the book just came out. So if you look at asaline.com and you look up my name, you'll see the book. It's called Arturo Fuente from 1912. And we shot over 15 months, literally everything from seed to final package, and all the aspects about the family and the business, traveling to the Dominican twice, along with trips to New York and Michigan to complete the rest of it. Everything from still life to portrait and travel is everything I shot. So it was a really fun project. And if we talk about the culmination of things, that's a great example of a situation where somebody used me to every aspect of what I do. And we challenged ourselves with lighting on location and minimal equipment and all sorts of fun things like that. So it was a great experience, and I'm super humbled by the size of the book, and we'll see how successful it is.
Amazing. Do you at least get a copy of it? Because that sounds like an amazing piece to have.
I did. It was in my contract that I would receive one copy of the big book. I don't know, because I am contracted to get the small book as well. Mm-hmm. I'll be interested to see if they send it with the cigars or not. I'm not a huge cigar smoker anymore, but certainly I've shared a few, and enjoy them. So we'll see if I get the cigars too. But the book is actually sitting right behind me. I haven't unboxed it yet because it comes with gloves and everything. It's like a real collector's piece. And I'm not so sure I want it on my coffee table. I'm not sure where I want to store it so that it's protected. So,
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciated all your time, all the stories that you shared. And I'll definitely be putting links down below for everything in the show notes and whatnot, so people can check out your work. And please go check out Ian's Instagram. You can learn so much about photography and the products and everything that he does, as well as seeing all the cool behind the scenes. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and hope to work with you soon.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate your time on this. I remember when you had told me you do this, I was like, oh, that's so amazing. And I would love to do it at any time. So if you ever need me back, feel free to call anytime. And for sure, let's get on set again together.
Thank you so much for watching and listening to this week's episode of the Creative Lotus Podcast. And a huge thank you to Ian for all of his amazing stories. This week's Buddhist quote of the week is, Buddhism teaches that nothing happens by chance. Everything has meaning. Please be convinced that your inner life is already endowed with everything you need. No matter how difficult your situation may be, you are alive now, and there is no treasure more precious than life itself. By Daisaku Ikeda. What is up, Creative Lotus family? Thank you so much for supporting the Creative Lotus Podcast. Go ahead and follow us on social media. On Facebook, we're at the Creative Lotus Podcast. Here on YouTube, maybe you're watching, we're at the Creative Lotus Podcast as well. And on Instagram, we're at the Creative Lotus Pod. And my personal handle is at Alan Zaki. We say thank you once again. Go ahead and subscribe, listen, write a review. And until the next episode, we'll see you there. Have a wonderful day and stay safe. Bye-bye.